Hey all, welcome to the Redzone Rodeo. We are here for our episode number 6. I am your co-host Carson, and I'm here with Rob, and we are going to be bringing to you some awesome UFL and NFL news today. Some really cool stuff. Not only are we going to be breaking down some key news in both of those leagues that just kind of broke the past couple days, but today we're actually going to be focusing on our wide receiver breakdown for each of the UFL teams. And then once we are concluded with that, we will be going into some of the NFL news in regards to franchise tags, and even breaking down our first mock draft. So we're gonna run with that and see where the night takes us. But to start us off, Rob, what are some of the two, I should say, it's really three, but what are some of these big kind of news that is broke recently in the UFL in regards to some key players returning?
Well, the two most important things to me as a Renegades fan. The first, we talked about how Luis Perez was the quarterback of the Renegades last week on our quarterback breakdown. He had not officially been signed to the team yet until just this past week. So everyone expected him to sign back with the team, but that was kind of up in the air because the Renegades had drafted a quarterback first overall. But he is now officially back. He re-signed with the team. The Renegades also re-signed tight end Sal Cannella, who was their leading receiver last year. Big weapon for them. Super happy about that ad. The last piece of UFL news we need to get to here is the Defenders officially re-signed their quarterback, Jordan Tamu, who, again, we talked about last week during the quarterback breakdown, but it wasn't official until just this past week.
Yeah, so those are the three kind of big signings in regards to guys that have not only done super well in both spring leagues, but guys who are key to have kind of, I would say, breakout seasons for each of their teams. These were great signings or re-signings, I should say, and great things done by the Renegades and the Defenders with both of these kind of signings in these regards to these three players. But speaking about Jordan Tamu, we're going to be starting with the DC Defenders wide receiver room, and we're not going to cover everybody in terms of these wide receivers because, of course, the teams still have the total of 75 players on their rosters. Now, these rosters will be significantly cut down before the start of the season, so there could be some of these names in regards to the wide receiver room who just don't make the cut. So rather than going over and throwing out a number of names at you, we're going to kind of cover and narrow it down to just covering a couple of these guys who either have done super well previously in spring seasons, people to keep your eye on in the next upcoming spring league season with the UFL, or guys that we think are going to have breakout kind of seasons for these teams, and what we think of these wide receiver rooms. So to start us off with the DC Defenders, Rob, what can you tell us about this wide receiver room? Who should we have our eyes on, and how does this wide receiver room compare with the rest of the league?
Well, last year, the DC Defenders wide receiver room was kind of a two-trick pony show. They had Lucky Jackson and Chris Blair, and they were both really great wide receivers. They both had, I think Lucky Jackson was over 500 yards. Chris Blair was over 400 yards. Just two really good players for them last year, and they're both gone now. To replace them, they brought in NFL veterans Kiki Kuti and Preston Williams. Those are two guys who used to be really good, or maybe not really good, but they were notable players. They were guys you could pick up off like the bench in your fantasy league because there was a chance they might have like a 100-yard, two-touchdown game or something like that. They certainly weren't bad. They were good, solid number two, number three wide receivers in the NFL for several years. Then they kind of just fizzled out. So no one really knows what to expect from either of them, but they have produced at a high level before. If they can kind of get back into the swing of things and produce like they were in the NFL, I think the Defenders could have one of the more dangerous wide receiver rooms in the league this year. But it's all kind of up in the air right now because behind these two guys, Kiki Kuti and Preston Williams, they don't really have anyone that notable. They haven't really done too much to replace losing their two best receivers last year, outside of bringing in these two new NFL veterans. So hopefully that works out for them. If not, they might be in kind of a bind there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, especially with that kind of lock on the quarterback position with Jordan Tamu, he was able to kind of make receivers, I would say, even last year for the DC Defenders look a lot better. So, even in regards to the talent that's in this room already, I could easily see them exceeding even what our limitations may have on some of these other guys that is in this receiver room. So, definitely look out for the DC Defenders. Another receiving room that I also am liking the look of in regards to sustained winning the past number of seasons is the Birmingham Stallions roster when it comes to their wide receiver room. Uh, Unfortunately, Davion Davis, one of their top receivers last year, will not be returning to the league, not be returning to the Stallions, as he is up now and will be playing with the Canadian Football League. But they do have some other guys who are returning that were very high on the receiving stat sheet list. Dion Kane is one of those individuals who has not only some NFL experience, but he's been with the Birmingham Stallions for both of their years in existence. For at least that first season, he was in the 20,000 or 2023 USFL Championship game. Sorry, that was the second season, not the first one. But he caught 3 touchdown passes, and that was like a big thing for him in 2023. So expect him to keep up with that level of play and being a dangerous wide receiver for the Stallions moving forward. Another guy that's on the list that played really well for them last season, although he didn't really have that big of a splash. Expect him to come back a little bit better, but it's Marlon Williams. And Marlon Williams played really, really well for them, especially in 2022. So the first season as a Birmingham Stallion. He had the longest reception with a 65-yard touchdown in that championship game in 2022. And throughout that season, he finished third in that league. So that kind of level of play in regards to this receiving room and Marlon Williams and Dion Kane, those are two guys you want to keep your eye on when watching the Stallions play, especially with this receiver room. Another guy I want to mention who was very influential their first season was Victor Bolden. Now, Victor Bolden kind of played in both spring leagues. In the first season of the USFL, he was on the Stallions roster. And last year, he played for the Arlington Renegades in the XFL. He clearly had a better season with Birmingham in 2022. His time with Arlington was not the greatest. But this is also another veteran with Williams and Kane who, you know, when you look at the roster that the Birmingham Stallions have, one thing that kind of exists is these guys have played in the Skip Holtz system. That they're used to this system already, and they all have succeeded, whether that was last year, whether that was 2 years ago. And so expect these kind of veterans guys who are coming back to have a lot of success, especially in this wide receiver room, where we may see the likes of Jamar Smith throwing the ball to them, but even we may even see Matt Corral or some of these other guys who are doing well in spring training. So some of those guys definitely keep your eye out on Williams, Kane, and Bolden, as those are the three I would keep my eyes on in terms of the Stallions.
Yeah, I think Marlon Williams potentially has the ability to be a breakout player this year. I know he wasn't the most productive wide receiver on that team, but he came to the USFL straight out of college. So he's a very young
Mm,
guy, is still not the most refined player in the world. If he can keep growing and improving, I think he has a real chance to be something special because he's kind of one of those bigger guys. He's not really fast. Once he starts to learn like the technicalities of route running and like that sort of thing and creating separation with things other than your speed, I feel like he'll be a much better weapon for them. And I could definitely see him having a big leap this year in terms of productivity. Uh,
absolutely.
Speaking of teams from the South, I think the next team we should go over is my favorite team, the Arlington Renegades. Uh, Last year, they were not great at wide receiver. Their leading receiver, as we mentioned before, was a tight end in Sal Cannella. But they did manage to bring back three of their top four wide receivers. Tyler Vaughn led them in receiving yards last year. He's back. Luwan Cunningham was their number three guy last year. He came back. And Caleb Van Der Esch, who is the cousin of Cowboys linebacker Leighton Van Der Esch, is also returning to the team this year. So that's all exciting. They were all pretty solid. None of them were like the most dynamic guys. But they were able to create consistent separation, beat man on man, which is all you can really expect out of your wide receivers. Unfortunately, the Renegades did lose their second best wide receiver, Brandon Arconado, who was a big part of the team last year, especially down the stretch towards the playoffs. He kind of caught on fire. He wasn't really all that great before Luis Perez got to the team, but Perez had a really good connection with him. I think Luis Perez's best game throwing the football for the Renegades came with a lot of big passes and touchdowns to Brandon Arconado. So that was definitely not great to see him leave spring football for the Canadian Football League. But the Renegades did make one big move in terms of wide receivers. They acquired Deontay Burnett, who, Carson, I'm sure you're familiar with because he was a dominant receiver for the Roughnecks last year. So I'm very excited to see him get added into the rotation. And I think the Renegades have a pretty good mix of weapons to use. They don't really have a guy that I would look at and say this is like, the dominant weapon that they're going to be targeting and feeding throughout the game. But they have a bunch of guys who I say are like good, solid options that they can feed throughout the game. Working together, I think that will give them a really good supporting cast at wide receiver for this coming season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whether or not that's Luis Perez that's leading kind of the backfield, or even Lindsey Scott, or maybe one of these other guys, the Renegades certainly, I feel, upgraded their wide receiver room from last year in regards to weapons. Of course, they had some of those top guys, some of them not returning, but adding some of that talent, like you mentioned, from the Roughnecks and some other teams should help to round out that wide receiver room. But absolutely, I think that this wide receiver room is also pretty good, and especially with Luis Perez, as I'm sure he will be the day one starter. It's gonna have some offensive weapons to deal with if you're a defense.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Shifting over to another team from Texas, my favorite boys, the Houston Roughnecks. This wide receiver room, I think, is probably one of the better ones in the league. I wouldn't say it's the best, and we'll cover the best here shortly. But they do have a lot of dominant receivers. My only question really when it comes to this receiver room is who's going to be throwing them the ball. As some of the quarterbacks, as we mentioned, that the Roughnecks have, are a little unproven when it comes to spring football and even their experience. But getting into the wide receiver room, there's two guys that I definitely want to mention. One is Justin Hall, and Justin Hall was the leading receiver for the Houston Gamblers last year. So the Houston Gamblers, of course, is basically just the transformed Houston Roughnecks. They're just rebranded them. In terms of bringing them over, part of the USFL conference of the new UFL. But Justin Hall was the leading receiver and did very, very well last season. So having him back is going to be a big addition. And the other big addition is Isaiah Henney. And Isaiah Henney played for the Pittsburgh Maulers last season. I actually should say the last two seasons, but it was really the most recent season in 2023 that he kind of went off. And so both of those guys expect a lot from them in terms of capabilities on the offensive side of the ball. Definitely those two dudes, I think, are going to be top scorers for the Roughnecks moving forward in terms of not only points scored, but also receiving yards. But they have also some really good help backing them up. And a couple players I want to mention is Isaiah Zuber, Anthony Ratliff Williams, and Stephen Dunbar. Now, Isaiah Zuber and Anthony Ratliff Williams, they both had played for the Gamblers last season. Did not do too well. They were about average receivers in the scheme. They had a couple breakout games, but for the most part, they were kind of quiet all of last season. But these are two kind of stellar receivers that do a really good job of complementing someone like Justin Hall, someone like Isaiah Henney. Um, and so both of those guys, I think, are going to be great, like wide receiver twos and threes for the Roughnecks team in regards to this receiving room. And the last guy I mentioned, Stephen Dunbar, he's definitely someone to keep our eyes on. He was very successful in the Canadian Football League, especially with the Edmonton Elks last season, where he had over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he's someone that hasn't had a lot of experience in the spring league. He actually played for the Dallas Renegades in 2020, but has spent a lot of his past time playing in the CFL. But he's someone that I think should be someone to keep your eyes on in regards to this upcoming spring season. Someone who can certainly play some good football, and we'll see how that translates from the Canadian Football League to the UFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with them, Carson. I think they have a lot of good guys who can get the job done if as long as there's someone there who's able to throw them the ball well. And I guess
Yep,
that's always going to be the big question in Houston until one of those quarterbacks steps up and answers it. You did mention the best wide receiver core in the league, and I think we both agree that that is the St. Louis Battlehawks. So last year,
absolutely.
I think the Battlehawks unquestionably had the best wide receiver room in the XFL because they had Hakeem Butler and Darius Shepard, who were both well over 500 yards receiving. And they also had a lot of really good depth pieces in Austin Prohl and Marcel Aitman, who were well over 200 yards receiving. And they managed to return all four of those guys to their wide receiver room for this coming year. Not only did they return those four guys, they also went out and got the best receiver, in my opinion, from the USFL last year, Ja'Cour Pearson, who had almost an 800-yard season with Ben DiNucci and the Seattle Sea Dragons. Um, Taking the two best receivers from the XFL and putting them together with the best receiver from the USFL, I think is just an absolutely unfair combination. Given that, the Battlehawks will also be employing one of the better quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the league, in AJ McCarron. I expect them to have by far the best aerial attack of any team in the league. I wouldn't be surprised if their top three receivers each individually have more yards than any other receiver on any other team. I just think it's going to be insane aerial attack that nobody is going to be able to stop. If you're going to beat them, I think you're going to have to score a lot of points and you're going to have to do it fast. This is why I think the Battlehawks are probably one of the best, if not the best teams in the league right now.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. It's going to be so tough to stop these offensive weapons. It's kind of like talking about a super stacked team in the NFL and how do you cover all of those weapons? That's kind of how I feel about the Battlehawks because the wide receiver room is great. The quarterback great, and especially with AJ McCarron and Hawks this season. I think a lot of it is going to have to be in regards to a big shootout. Like, can you score more points than them? Or I guess, can you shut down all weapons like a team can? And that's really going to be the hard part with stopping the Battlehawks this season. And so you're going to have to match them step for step. And if you can't do that, then you're going to fall behind. And if you fall behind, they're just going to keep outscoring you. Um, Super explosive offense, definitely one to watch. And I think they're going to be scary this upcoming season. No doubt about it. No doubt about it in my mind at all.
Absolutely. They're going to be terrifying.
Now, we talked about the best and who we think right wide receiver room is. Doing a little opposite here, talking about, I would probably argue, one of the worst, maybe not the worst in the league, but definitely the worst in the USFL conference. The Memphis Showboats, they are not really, I guess on their rosters, there is not a lot of these guys who are high in their receiving numbers in regards to spring football. And I think that's something that should be taken into consideration. Their highest receiver last year was Vinny Papale. And Vinny Papale, I know I'm probably butchering that. The only thing that kind of is interesting about him is he's the son of the former Philadelphia Eagles, Vince Papale, who was in that movie and that film Invincible. So it's that guy's son. So it's kind of cool that this guy's, playing in kind of his father's footsteps. Um, but last season, he only had 345 yards in all 10 games that he played and only scored 3 touchdowns. And their top receiver in terms of receiving yards and touchdowns scored and whatnot. The guys behind him, they're all kind of about the same. They're about average at the end of the season, having about 200-ish yards. And so they don't have, at least that I'm seeing right now, when I'm looking at this roster, they don't have that kind of number one guy to throw to. The guy that has scored over hundreds and hundreds of yards in regards to being a standout number one guy. Granted, they do have some really well, are really good return guys, and that are also wide receivers as well. So that's something that I think is going to be positive for the Memphis Showboats. Derek Dillon and Ryan McDaniel are two of those guys that were probably the best in the USFL last year in regards to returning the football. So expect this their special teams play, and especially when it comes to returning the football, to be top notch. But these guys were just average receivers when it came to playing the slot and making routes and getting separation. So interesting to see if those guys will jump off this upcoming season. The only other addition that they made, because both Derek Dillon and Ryan McDaniel did play for the Showboats last season. The only other addition that has kind of a bigger name on their roster this past offseason is Jonathan Adams. And Jonathan Adams played for the New Orleans Breakers in 2022 and 2023. And he did really well, especially in the 2022 season, his first season, where he finished fifth in the league for receiving yards for the season at about 406 yards with 5 touchdowns, which doesn't seem like a lot, but especially on the Breakers team that first year, he was one of their leading guys. So if Jonathan Adams can come in and kind of be that number one guy for them, I definitely can see this wide receiver room going a lot further than it already has. But there's just too many kind of average and below average guys on this roster right now that it's going to be interesting to see if any of them have breakout seasons. If I have to put my money on any, I think Jonathan Adams will be that number one guy in Memphis. But I have to say that, despite having Case Cookus at quarterback, despite having a really good return game, this is probably one of the weakest wide receiver rooms when it comes to the UFL.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. They have a lot of guys that just kind of make you shrug your shoulders, and you're like, yeah, I mean, nothing special. Maybe they have a few guys who can get the job done, but no one that's really going to scare opposing defenses. Now, you said they're one of the worst, but not the worst. Well, I think the worst wide receiver room in the entire league belongs to the San Antonio Brahmas. Last year, their top two receivers were Landon Akers and Jacques Patrick. Uh, Neither of them, I think, were over 400 yards. Neither of them were particularly great. And on top of that all, they lost Jacques Patrick, and they didn't really do anything to replace him. They do have their number three receiver from last year, Elise Mack, still on the team, but he wasn't really the most impactful player in the world. They really just don't have anyone on the outside that is going to consistently threaten opposing defenses. Just something to note, they do have KD Cannon and TJ Vasher, who Cowboys fans might recognize as guys who really stood out in the preseason when they were on the Cowboys practice squad a couple of years ago. They didn't really get a lot of opportunity last year, but they're definitely guys who have potential and possibly could see more work in the Brahmas rotation this year. Not that they lost Patrick, and the two guys at the top of the depth chart aren't necessarily superstars either. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a little bit more of KD Cannon and TJ Vasher in the Brahmas rotation this year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do think the Brahmas probably have the worst when it comes to in the league. Um, it's going to be interesting to see if some of these players step it up and, even though they have been just mediocre to okay receivers, just shrug your shoulders, guys. Maybe they'll take the face of a WR1. That's yet to be seen, but looking at it now, I absolutely agree. I think this is probably one of the worst when it comes to the wide receiver rooms.
For sure.
The last team in the UFL in terms to cover for the wide receiver rooms, they also I would probably put them in a not so great wide receiver room category, is the Michigan Panthers. Now, the Michigan Panthers last year, their two top receivers were Joe Walker and Trey Quinn. Both of those guys going over 400 and 500 yards. Being big weapons for the Panthers last year in a not so stellar season for them. Unfortunately, they were not able to retain Joe Walker, so he will not be on the roster this upcoming season. But they were able to keep Trey Quinn. And so Trey Quinn could easily become the wide receiver one. But it really seems like last year they did really well with a dual wide receiver kind of room, two guys kind of sharing the task of receiving catches and whatnot. Two guys that they kind of went back and forth with. It's going to be interesting to see who's going to complement Trey Quinn in this game. I expect Trey Quinn to have a really good season this upcoming year. I don't know if you remember. I believe it was last year's USFL season. It could be 2 years. But as a huge Napoleon Dynamite fan, I absolutely loved when Trey Quinn did his little Napoleon Dynamite dance type thing. That was super cool to see, and he is definitely stayed in my brain when it comes to people to keep my eye on. So, regardless of his dance moves with Napoleon Dynamite and his little shout out to that great film. Um, he's also probably going to be a top receiver for the Panthers this year. In terms of guys that are going to be kind of trying to battle for this number two spot in terms of the wide receiving room, I have three previous Philadelphia Stars receivers, and those guys are Devin Gray, Jordan Sewell, and Terry Wright. Now, all three of these guys have played in the Spring Football League. They haven't amounted to much, whether it's through injury, just, bad play, you name it. These guys haven't done the craziest in amounts of, players being like, oh my goodness, like look at this standout receiver. They've been kind of mediocre, but they all are competent receivers in filling in that potential wide receiver role for Michigan. So I would absolutely say that Trey Quinn is going to be probably that number one guy, but it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to be that number two, who's going to be that number three. I would say definitely out of the three that I just mentioned, as with Gray, Sewell, and Wright, I would put my money that Jordan Sewell is going to probably have a little bit better of a season. His first year with Philadelphia in 2022 was a really good season. He racked up about 370 receiving yards and three touchdowns. The most recent season wasn't too stellar. If I'm not mistaken, I think that he was also injured for a little bit of that season as well, which also hindered his stats when it comes to the receiving yards. But I think that he's definitely going to stand out as a top candidate for that top receiving kind of position with Trey Quinn on the Panthers.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Right now, they just have Trey Quinn and a bunch of guys who are unproven. So I wouldn't expect too much from any of those guys that you were just talking about, but they all certainly have the chance to step up and become a really good number two wide receiver for that team. I am excited to see what Trey Quinn does now as the unquestioned number one on that team. I wonder if he'll, perform a lot better because he'll have more opportunities, more targets, or if he'll kind of crumble under the pressure. So I'm very curious to see what happens with Trey Quinn this year. But we just spent a good amount of time talking about wide receivers in the UFL. So I think now would also be a good time to talk about wide receivers in the NFL because there's been a lot of news happening at that position lately. And the first big piece of news is T. Higgins, the standout wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, the 1B to Jamar Chase's 1A over there, was franchise tagged recently by the team this past week. I think that's a great move for Cincinnati. I think it would have been a mistake to let D. Higgins walk and go anywhere else. I feel like the Cincinnati Bengals identity is having Joe Burrow and a bunch of elite wide receivers and just airing the ball out all over the field. And if they lose a key part of that identity, I don't know if they'll be as successful as they have been the past few years here since they drafted Joe Burrow.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think this is the right move for the Bengals to make. As a Titans fan, it hurts a little bit because, of course, there was that speculation that, oh, he's coming to Tennessee. Brian Callahan's over here, like let's bring him in. Let's have him be, uh, wide receiver two for Will Levis, behind DeAndre Hopkins. There was a lot of that kind of hype going around, but I can't fault the Bengals for franchise tagging him because that was probably the best thing that they could have done with the situation. And absolutely, I think the Bengals certainly did not play up to expectations last season due to a lot of different reasons. But T. Higgins, I think, is definitely a part of that equation for their success this upcoming season. And I would definitely expect Joe Burrow to kind of have another kind of breakout year. And having T. Higgins and Jamar Chase on your roster in terms of the wide receiving room is so far it's so better than some of these other options that are out there. Especially Higgins knowing the system and being already comfortable with Joe Burrow. So definitely a great pickup, or not pickup, I should say. Definitely a great tag for the Bengals. I believe he's going to be doing some great things this upcoming 2024 season. So absolutely.
Do you think the Bengals are going to retain Tyler Boyd as well? Because he is now an unrestricted free agent, and the Bengals don't have any way to stop him from leaving to go accept a better offer elsewhere. I don't know if the Bengals will even try to re-sign him because having a franchise tag on Higgins and the big deal coming up for Jamar Chase is a lot of money to devote to one position on the team, and to add another big contract on top of that might be kind of unmanageable. But I wonder if Tyler Boyd, I think he's played with Cincinnati for almost all of his career, if not all of it. He might, give them like a hometown discount because he just wants to stay in Cincinnati where he's always been.
Yeah.
So do you think Tyler Boyd will stay with the Bengals, or do you think he's going to go somewhere else?
It's very interesting. Part of me, of course, kind of thinks that he's going to stay, just because he knows the system, he knows what it is. But I guess more of me is leaning to he's going to be on a different roster this upcoming year, especially with T Higgins being franchise tagged. Um, Boyd kind of has the ability to kind of go anywhere in regards to accepting whoever gives him the most money. Um, Granted, I don't know if he's going to want to go to a team that's kind of in a rebuild process and phase. So that kind of limits some of that down a little bit. But I could easily see him go into a team. Well, despite this, I mean, there's some controversy with AJ Brown with the Eagles. Um, Tyler Boyd could go in there and maybe try to rebalance the ship in terms of the wide receiving room for the Eagles. Um, but yeah, I do think that we're not going to see Tyler Boyd in a Bengals uniform this upcoming season. I think he's going to move on,
I agree.
and I think rightfully so. I think he deserves more than he's getting paid in Cincinnati.
I think the two most likely contenders for Tyler Boyd are the Kansas City Chiefs and the team on that flag behind you. So those are probably the two spots I would pick if I had to bet money on, a team he's going to end
Yeah,
up on.
absolutely. Yeah, I like as a Titans fan, I feel like that's a good option um in free agency, but for some reason I'm leaning, especially with what we've been hearing from the NFL Combine coming out, especially from Brian Callahan and Rand Carthon. They have been saying stuff that it's not a lock that they're going to be picking a tackle at 7. And there was paraphrasing here. Callahan pretty much said, if we feel like our guy is at 7 and he's not, and he's because he definitely laid out that wide receiver and offensive lineman are two positions the Titans need to cover this draft and in free agency this year. And that being the case, Callahan made it pretty clear that if our guy's at number 7, we're not just gonna go with like, oh well, tackle makes the most sense. We're gonna go and get him. And so there is a strong likelihood of bringing in a rookie guy, but also bringing in not only a rookie guy and high first round pick could also be a great thing to pick up of a veteran as well to kind of fill out the room with DeAndre Hopkins, a young guy, still trying to evaluate if Traylon Burks is going to be anything in the league. So yeah, but absolutely, Tyler Boyd would be a great pickup for the Titans. I don't know if that's the direction they're going to be going, just because I know in terms of free agent signings, I feel like it's going to be heavily on offensive line, as well as even some defensive players. For example, the Dolphins are not going to be signing. Um, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on their safety. Oh,
Javon Holland.
no, it's not Holland. It's Xavier Howard. Xavier Howard. Uh
Oh, yeah.
the yeah, they're not going to come back, and it doesn't look like they're going to be re-signing him. So he's going to be available for pickup. And I've been hearing, the Titans may be looking at, filling out some defensive players as well in free agency. Xavier Howard would be a good pickup for that. So I don't know which direction they're going to throw their money at. Um, but I would love to have Tyler Boyd. I think that'd be a great pickup, but I don't know if it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, that would definitely be a great pickup for you guys. You mentioned a few things we're going to talk about later, the draft and the NFL Combine. But before we do that, there is one other piece of wide receiver news that I thought was pretty interesting that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
A report came out this past week that Justin Jefferson could be traded by the Minnesota Vikings, and the potential of that is actually picking up some steam. Now, my
Hmm.
first impulse when I saw this report was, why on earth would the Minnesota Vikings ever trade Justin Jefferson? Someone who arguably had a claim as the best wide receiver since, maybe Jerry Rice, someone who was like on that, golden jacket Hall of Fame trajectory, someone who could have very well been the first 2,000-yard receiver in NFL history this year if he hadn't gotten hurt. Why would you ever move on from someone like that who's only, what, 24, 25 in the prime of his career?
Yeah,
Um,
super young.
then I kind of started thinking about it a little bit more. Uh, First of all, I think the Vikings would get at least two, if not three, first-round picks in return for Justin Jefferson, even though he's in a contract here. Because he's a young superstar, arguably the best player in the league at the most valuable or one of the most valuable positions. Two, he is coming off an injury where he did not look as good following the injury as he did previous to the injury. And so maybe you do kind of have a little bit of doubt about Justin Jefferson, and you're thinking, hey, is he going to fully recover from that injury he had? Is he ever going to be Justin Jefferson again? Is he going to go out there and make crazy one-handed catches on 4th and 30 that, could win us the game? Uh, I don't know. I mean, I would assume so, but I wouldn't be surprised if that doubt at least existed in the minds of, the Vikings general manager and owner. Uh, so the more I thought about it, and he's also coming up on a contract year where he's going to be you're going to have to give him at least $30 million a year, I think, to keep him on the team. So when you combine all of those factors, what you could get for him if you trade him, how much you're going to have to pay him, and the possibility of the injury slowing him down, it doesn't seem as crazy to me that they might be considering, moving on from Justin Jefferson. But I still overall think it's not a great idea for them to do that.
Yeah, I definitely think that, it's smart for the Vikings to hear offers, and begin to kind of contemplate some of those next moves for them. Because, the matter that's kind of before the Vikings right now, I feel like, is they're kind of stuck because they don't have a good enough roster to compete with their division and compete for even a place in the playoffs. Whether you're bringing in a rookie quarterback, I don't think they're going to sign Kirk Cousins. I'm pretty sure that they're writing that off, and that he's going to be, one of these top free agents. Um, but I think, the Vikings have to look at their roster and be like, okay, if we're going to implode this and rebuild it back up in a chance to, build it so it can compete with the likes of Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers, Jared Goff, Dan Campbell and the Lions, and whatever the Bears are going to be doing, with whether they're going to be adding a quarterback or building on to their roster. Um, the Vikings are kind of left in the dust in regards to that division. And so I think, if you're the front office for the Vikings, you're going to be listening to offers. You're going to be like, "Hey, what would you be willing to give us for Justin Jefferson?" And of course, Justin Jefferson is this talented player, and I agree that after the injury, he certainly didn't look great, but I would argue he's gonna be okay, and he's gonna still have crack seasons, where he's clearly, top, um, in the league in terms of his position. But I wouldn't I mean, if I'm the Vikings, I'd listen. If a team's willing to offer you
Absolutely.
3 first rounders and more, maybe even players, maybe even other things like that, um, we saw what Russell Wilson went for, and that's an older quarterback. So take that and like multiply it times 4 or 5 for a player like Justin Jefferson. You know, it gives the Vikings a lot of opportunities, especially if they're thinking about, well, we're not competing in the division, so we need to get pieces through the draft, free agency, whatnot. And how do you do that? You by selling your assets that you have that aren't going to do you much good if they're just on mediocre rosters moving forward. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point. They are probably heading towards a rebuild, and a great way to get enough draft capital to kind of speed up that process and secure some real blue chip players would be to trade Justin Jefferson. It would be insane to think about a player that good being moved by his team in the prime of his career, but this is one of the rare scenarios where I feel like it actually makes sense. There's not a lot of skill players in the league who can command the same sort of trade package as like an elite quarterback in his prime would. But I think Justin Jefferson is the definition of that kind of player who is worth the 3 first round picks and a few extra players if he returns to form, which again, I think he will, but that doubt I feel like has to linger there.
yeah.
In terms of teams that could possibly trade for him, one team I will eliminate right now is the Dallas Cowboys because they always get connected to every, big name free agent or player that becomes available. And the reason they can't trade for Justin Jefferson is because they have CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson came from the same draft class, which means they'll have to have their contract extended in the same year. And you can't have two wide receivers negotiating $30 million contracts at the same time. It's just financially impossible for any team to manage in the salary cap era. So that is definitely not a possibility. The team I would say is most likely, we just talked about them for the possibility of getting Tyler Boyd, is the Kansas City Chiefs. Because, oh my goodness, could you imagine if prime Justin Jefferson is over there catching passes from Patrick Mahomes? I think that would put them as Super Bowl favorites for the next 5, 10 years, like no matter what.
Mhm.
It would be, like Steve Young and or Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. It's just one of those combinations that are all time. Two gold jacket players on the same team like that. I just it would be amazing to watch. I think it'd be like a connection between a quarterback and a wide receiver we haven't seen in a long time. But it would also be terrifying as a fan of any team except for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'm rooting against it, but I think that would be the most likely option.
Do you think they have enough money to bring him in though? Because I know that that's what they're kind of suffering with right now in terms of the Chiefs, being able to have that cap space for him.
Yeah, well, I think if you're the Chiefs and you realize that wide receiver is the weakness on your team and it's what almost lost you a lot last season. I know you managed to overcome it at the end. Uh, but you're not always going to be able to rely on that defense. You're going to have to get some really good wide receivers. Especially with all the players leaving, Chris Jones, L'Jarius Sneed. Maybe you'll manage to get one of those two guys, but I think you can make the money to go out and get a guy like Justin Jefferson who will completely transform your team, even if you have to cut some other players to do it. And also, he's still on his rookie contract right now. So if you negotiated a new deal with him, that wouldn't go into effect until like a couple years, well, 1 year down the road. So that gives you some flexibility with how you structured things. If they want Justin Jefferson bad enough, they will find a way to make the room to get him. And I think that's exactly what they should do. Because as long as you have Mahomes, if you put Justin Jefferson on that team, no matter who else is on that team, it's going to be a Super Bowl favorite, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's teams are going to have to give up a lot. And I know, I mean, for the Chiefs though to get that, mark in history of the first team to three-peat in a Super Bowl, that would certainly be a ticket that I think they would punch, if given the opportunity. Another team though that I'll throw out there. What about the LA Chargers
I mean, that
with
would
Justin
be,
Herbert
yeah,
and
no,
Jim
that,
Harbaugh?
yeah, that would be, and
Because that could be something that could also be a team that's looking to compete with the likes of the Chiefs for the division. Um, it's tough when you have the Chiefs as a divisional opponent that you play twice a year. So that being the case, do you stack your room with it? Um, Especially with isn't it? It's Eckler, right? Is he going to be a free agent, Austin Eckler
is,
this year?
yep,
Yeah. So he could be even Austin Eckler's replacement in regards to a weapon. But I don't know. I don't know if the Chargers are willing to give up, that many, at least two first round picks.
at least.
Yeah. And that would be
Yep.
tough. It puts a team in a very tough situation because you pretty much are betting it all that it's going to work out for years to come because unless you trade up in the drafts and whatnot and lose more capital, you're not, you're going to be hoping to pick some diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, I mean, they've already invested so much in their wide receiver room. They just spent a first round pick last year. They have Keenan Allen on
That's
a
right.
big contract. They have, is it Mike Williams? I think one of the two Williams brothers is still there. I forget which one. Also on a kind of big contract. But at
Yeah.
the same time, getting a player like Justin Jefferson might be what they need to make them not a 500 team anymore. That's like the notorious Chargers meme. They're always 500 no matter what. They can never do anything. You get a player like Justin Jefferson and put him with Justin Herbert, I don't think you would be 500 anymore. That's a winning team right there, especially with the pieces they
Yeah.
have on defense. I know it didn't work out great last year, but they have good players. They just need it all to come together. And you add Justin Jefferson to that, I think you would have something special there with the Chargers. Um, I don't know if there's any other teams that I'd look at and say this is a team that should be trading like its future away to get Justin Jefferson because you need a team with a great quarterback and no weapons, and those are really the two that come to mind when I think of that scenario. Is there any other team you think that would be a good contender that should trade their
I mean,
future
there's
away?
always I mean, I've seen Titans people who are saying, "We need to get him. Let's get him. Like, get him in the room. We need to get him in." And it's like, yeah, that would be awesome. But there's just, I don't know. There's too many holes, I think, on the Titans team that need to be filled. Wide receiver, of course, is one of them, but there's a lot cheaper options out there for still talented players, without giving away picks that we will need, because of course, the goal is to get, people to buy tickets. And especially with that new stadium that they were wanting to build in Nashville, I believe 2027, 2028 is that kind of like time where they're going to be, launching it. You want to have a winning team then. And so adding Justin Jefferson certainly will help, but trading away the next couple of years in terms of assets, I just don't think Rand Carthon is going to be that aggressive when it comes to nailing down a player like Justin Jefferson, especially when we still have DeAndre Hopkins for another year on contract. Um, and the hope is, of course, Traylon Burks becomes something that Mike Vrabel wasn't able to turn him into. So, but yeah, so I've heard some news in regards to like the Titans and Justin Jefferson. Don't know if that's going to necessarily work. Um, but yeah, I don't know if there's like another team that would be huge in trying to trade for Justin Jefferson. I think the Chiefs would be a great landing point, Chargers landing point. Um, yeah.
Actually, I'll give you one other team that I think might be kind of obvious, and then one dark horse that I just thought of. So obvious, I think might be the Buffalo Bills because I think they're moving on from
True.
Stephon Diggs this offseason, and they don't have a number
Yeah.
one guy to replace him. So I think you could definitely see a trade package where Stephon Diggs is sent to the Vikings, which would be kind of crazy for him to go back there after, leaving for the Buffalo Bills and then see
Right.
Justin Jefferson sent, to Buffalo, which would probably be one of like the craziest trade stories of all time. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't rule that. And then the dark horse team I'm thinking of is the Los Angeles Rams. I know they have Cooper
Mm,
Kupp and Nakua right now, but Cooper Kupp is not going to be around a lot longer, I don't think, in terms of being in the NFL. And I think the Rams are notorious for being super aggressive with their draft capital. I mean, that's the reason they haven't had a first round pick in years now, because they traded it all away for great players when they became available. If
Yeah.
there's anyone in the, and they finally have that draft capital again, they finally have first round picks again. So now that they're fully loaded up on draft capital again, if they're trying to build a roster that can compete this year, I mean, their defense is young and coming along. Their offensive line is young and exciting. They have a great quarterback at Matt Stafford, an emergent rookie wide receiver in Puka Nakua. You go out and get Justin Jefferson, you go out and look like the old Rams. That might be a ticket to another Super Bowl, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And even kind of thinking about it, Houston could also be another good team. That's like a young
Yeah.
team that even Justin Jefferson would want to go to, especially with what CJ Stroud was able to do this past season. Maybe it's too soon, because it's just one season to see if he can, perform that, with season after season after season, that kind of those kind of performances. But other than really kind of like Tank Dell, who got hurt, a lot of other guys had to kind of step up, like Noah Brown and whatnot. So Justin Jefferson could easily fit in with that system as well. I would not like that very much, um, but again, I don't know if Houston wants to, because they're still rebuilding too, with new head coach, new quarterback. So giving up that many first round picks, I don't know. It's gonna be tough for any team that pulls the trigger on it. Of course, if there's a team out there that's like, we want him, let's get him, and they're willing to give up pretty much anything for him, then if you're the Vikings, you listen and you're like, you know what? Do we think this is going to help better aid our franchise moving forward? Or is keeping Justin Jefferson for another year and then having to pay him top dollar, you know, going to be worth it in the end to
Yeah.
retain him?
It's a big question and certainly a shadow that will loom over this entire offseason until, it gets answered one way or another. Speaking of just the NFL offseason in general, though, the NFL Combine started this week. Today was like the first big day for testing and interviews and stuff like that with defensive linemen and linebackers. Uh, Nothing really notable came out of today specifically, but one of the bigger storylines around the Combine so far has been about Marvin Harrison Jr.
Mhm.
He has decided not to do the combine and not to test like at all at a pro day or anything, which is kind of unheard of for a top prospect. But a lot of people are praising him and saying, well, that's smart because he's focusing on getting ready for football instead of getting ready for testing. Because, obviously it's a lot different getting ready to run a really fast 40 than it is bulking up and getting ready to take hits in a football game. So a lot of people are saying his body will be in better shape and he'll be more ready for football than players who are focusing right now on just getting as skinny as possible so they can run as fast as possible, which a lot of wide receivers do before the NFL Combine. But then there's other people who are saying it kind of just shows that he's not dedicated enough, that, he's kind of just being
Mm.
lazy, saying, I already know I'm a top five pick. Why would I go do this? I don't have to do this. What's the point of doing it? So what's your take on the whole situation? Do you think it's smart for him to not test at the combine, or do you think he should be doing it?
Well, I think first off, especially this in this day, a lot of these young players, they just listen to whatever their agents tell them. And a lot of them, it's not necessarily their own decisions. It's just, hey, we think you should do this, and they follow. Because they're new to this, and the agents have been around for a while, and they know, at least in their opinion, they know what's best for these players. So I think first of all, I think it should be noted that this is probably his agent that's deciding for him, like, hey, don't do it. Um, but I'm definitely leaning more on the side of, I don't think that he is the type of player to just be like, you know what, I'm already a top five. Why would I do this? Um, I get that there's speculation. There was speculation when, uh oh man, why am I blanking? Um, the who are the Bears wanting to draft as quarterback?
Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams. Wow, that was sad. When Caleb Williams like came out and was like, "I will not play for Chicago," that was taken out of context and people just ran with that. So I think that I think it's lying more in the sense that he's just trying to get ready for the football season. Um, I think he will be a top five, you know, product, whether he tests or not. And especially if you're getting him in the top five and like, okay, he's not testing, he's not going to go through some of these similar hoops some of these other receivers and other players are doing by slimming down. He's actually preparing for game day. I honestly think that makes him even more of a candidate for, one of these teams to be like, what, this guy actually has the right mindset in focusing on, what's important, which is playing those games, not necessarily the times or the slimming down or the whatnot. So I do think that he's being smart in this. I don't think he's just blowing it off saying that, oh, look, I'm just the best, so I'm gonna get picked. But I also think that his agents certainly have a huge hand in this as well. And I think they're steering him in the right direction. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, why would he risk his draft stock by going to the combine and possibly like suffering an injury or testing really poorly?
mhm.
Why would he risk that? There's no point in doing it. He's already secured his spot as a top five pick by proving himself continuously over several years of college football. He was one of the fastest wide receivers in terms of top miles per hour speed hit in a game this past year. I think he hit like almost 21 miles per hour. That's faster than Malik Neighbors, who everyone's talking about is probably one of the fastest receivers in the draft this year. But he's probably not going to run a very great 40. I mean, his 40 time is probably like 4.5, which is about average for a wide receiver. So if you're not going to test great, but you put elite skills on tape, why would you go then perform in an environment that matters less, where you look less skilled and less talented than you actually are? Why would you risk injury? Why would you risk the damage to your reputation? On the other hand, I do worry about this a little bit because I'm afraid that there's going to be this trend of players not doing the combine,
Yeah.
not doing pro days. Um, for players like Marvin Harrison Jr., it's fine because you can just turn on his tape and you're like, okay, well, that guy, we don't even have to test him. We know he's going to be special. But for most players, it's not that way. For most players who
Yep.
have like a lot of gaps in their college tape, their physical traits are what's going to define their draftability because you can go find a big defensive tackle who sucked in college, but he tests out of the world at the combine. And you're like, wow, this guy could really be something special. And you only know that because of the combine, where you saw how fast he was, how agile he was, how strong he was. So I really hope that's just a part of the game that we don't lose over time. With guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who have like a solid top five draft status, it's fine. But for guys lower in the draft, whose physical abilities are going to be a really important part of what's going to get them picked, I hope they continue to go to the combine, go to their pro days, and kind of put that sort of stuff out there for scouts to see as they're assembling their draft boards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's very important because if you don't put that out and you're not this like top pick, um, it could hinder your draft capital in terms of when you're going to get picked. Is a team going to risk it? It's like, well, this guy, I don't know if I'm going to pick him in the second round because he didn't really show up at the combine. He didn't really do this. Like, great if he's trying to bulk up for the season, but I don't want to risk my only second round pick on this guy, or even a late first round pick on this guy. I'll go with someone else who did go to the combine. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. And I agree. I would hate to see a lot of players kind of doing this sort of trend, but I think, as you mentioned, it's okay for Marvin Harrison Jr. just because um, you watch those college tapes, you watch what he can do on the field, and you can already see the talent that's there, and you don't need to necessarily test them anymore. So
Well, speaking about the NFL draft, would you like to do right now a mock draft, the first ever NFL Redzone Rodeo mock draft of the first round of the NFL draft upcoming here, April 25th, I think is when it will be happening?
let's do it. Let's get right into it.
All right. So we're going to be using the PFF mock draft machine because, in my opinion, that's the best one. It's pretty easy to use. It ranks all the players for you based off of PFF's grades, which aren't necessarily consensus across the board, but I think they give a pretty good picture of like where the general ranking of that player is. Um, so Carson, I think we'll go back and forth. We'll each do one pick for whatever team is up at that particular spot. Since the Titans are 7 and the Cowboys are 24, I think you should do the odds and I should do the evens, and
Okay.
we can get started here whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Well, as I've said on previous shows, there's like part of me that thinks Justin Fields will stay with the Bears. Um, as of now, with recent news in regards to Ryan Poles coming out and saying certain stuff at the combine, I think the likelihood that Justin Fields stays in Chicago is on the downtrend. And so I think that, missing out on Patrick Mahomes and picking Mitch Trubisky um, is going to propel the Bears into selecting Caleb Williams first overall. I think they're going to go with that. I think they're going to trade Justin Fields, get draft capital. I don't know if it's first round caliber, definitely second, maybe third. Um, but I think Justin Fields will be out of Chicago uh, um, before this draft, actually, and I think it's going to be a good lock for them to pick Caleb Williams at one.
Yeah, there's been a ton of rumors building about Justin Fields going to the Bears. That's the betting favorite option now is for Justin Fields to end, or not the Bears, the Atlanta Falcons, excuse me. He's already on the Bears. Yeah, so I think Justin Fields will definitely be headed towards the Atlanta Falcons, probably sooner than later, definitely sometime before the draft. And the Bears are going to replace him. I fully agree with Caleb Williams. Now, at this number two spot, I think most people are projecting Drake May to be the quarterback who goes to the Commanders at number two because they're certainly taking a quarterback. They need one desperately. They have a new head coach. They're in the stage of rebuilding where they need to get their star quarterback. But I personally think they're going to go with Jaden Daniels over Drake May because I think Jaden
Interesting.
Daniels is the better prospect. I think he had a better year this year. I think he's more consistent than Drake May. Drake May only beat, I think, one top 25 school this year. He had a lot of games with multiple interceptions. Jaden Daniels carried a really bad defense really far this season. I mean, I know they didn't, make the college football playoffs or anything, but they won a lot of games and they did it because they had Jaden Daniels at quarterback. Granted, I know he had the best wide receiver combo in college football with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., but he made a lot of great plays regardless of who was out wide for him. And I think he should be the number two overall quarterback. And I think the idea of him being drafted second overall is gaining a lot of momentum. So for the Washington Commanders at number two overall, I'm going to go with Jaden Daniels.
Yep. Well, with Jaden Daniels gone, I think the Patriots are gonna be looking at Drake May on the board. I think quarterback is definitely what they're gonna go with in round one. Of course, with us doing this kind of mock draft, we're not gonna include trades in this one. We're just gonna go straight as is down the list in terms of the picks for each team. So that being the case, I think they're gonna go absolutely with Drake May at number three.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is going to be the one, two, three pick. Maybe not necessarily in this order. Maybe these two are flopped, but I think these are going to be the top three players off the board without a doubt.
Yeah.
Um, at number four, you have the Cardinals, who are going to be losing their best remaining wide receiver in Marquise Brown. They don't really have anyone else at the position, but they said they are fully committed to Kyler Murray just recently. Of course, they said the same thing about Josh Rosen before they picked Kyler Murray in the ensuing draft. So there's no guarantee that he's going to be the guy. But after these three quarterbacks go off the board, I don't think there's anyone worth being taken at the number four spot. And given how depleted their wide receiver room is and how great Marvin Harrison Jr. is, I think this is a pretty easy, fix here. I think the Arizona Cardinals will be drafting Marvin Harrison Jr.
So with number five, with the LA Chargers, with Marvin Harrison Jr. off the board, I think that I think that they're gonna go receiver here. And especially with Malik Neighbors being on the board and Rome Odunze, I think that despite some of their other needs, um, I think giving Justin Herbert another weapon because Quentin Johnston didn't necessarily work out last year with their receiver that they picked in the first round. I think they're going to be looking to kind of rewrite the ship with that, and especially with Jim Harbaugh being there, I think he's going to be looking to get the offense up and running. And so I think that with the fifth overall pick, I think Malik Neighbors will be going to the Chargers.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially since Keenan Allen is probably on his way out over there. They're definitely going to need to find someone to replace that production. And unless they have a lot of faith in Quentin Johnston, which who knows what Jim Harbaugh thinks about him, I feel like
Hmm.
wide receiver is the clear, obvious choice for them to go. Because in my opinion, Malik Neighbors is the next best player available. So that would be
Yeah.
a fantastic choice for them. Now, the Giants is kind of tough because I know they are desperately in need of a wide receiver one. And that's the thing they want the most this offseason, without a doubt. But they also really need a right tackle to replace Evan Neal because Evan Neal has been not so great. So the question becomes, do you take the elite tackle, the elite tight end, Brock Bowers, who can kind of serve as like a wide receiver or another really good weapon? Or do you take a slightly less elite, slightly less great wide receiver who would still be a really good wide receiver one? Um, I think the Giants are managed really well. I really like Joe Schoen. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I think he's a much better general manager than they've had in the past. So I think with all that being said, the Giants will go best player available here and take the guy at the top of their board, who, in my opinion, at this point will be Brock Bowers. I think he will be the best player available remaining. They're going to give Evan Neal another year to develop, and they know this is a very deep wide receiver class, so they can get some really good guys in the second round who aren't that much worse than Rome Odunze. So they're going to go take the difference maker, the elite weapon that they can put out on the field on every down in Brock Bowers.
Yeah, if not going with Brock Bowers, I would definitely say that potentially offensive lineman to replace that tackle. You know, if they don't give Evan Neal another year. But if this is the situation for the Titans, coming up on number 7, I think it's the choice really is, do we go tackle, which we desperately need, or do we go for Rome Odunze, who I would even argue could even have the potential of being better than a Malik Neighbors and even Marvin Harrison Jr. In terms of what he was able to put out this year. So
It's a bold claim, Carson.
it's very bold, but watching some of those, watching that tape, and granted, I don't think he's going to be taking over Marvin Harrison Jr. The real battle I think is going to be between Odunze and Neighbors, who's going to be picked first. But here at 7, I think that despite all of the excitement about Brian Callahan, when he was with the Bengals, they ended up choosing Jamar Smith over a tackle. I do really think that despite all of those kind of notions, the thing that has been the thorn in Titans football for the past number of years has been the offensive line. And especially with the top guy still being here at pick number 7, I think the Titans are going to go with Joe Alt from Notre Dame. I think they're going to try to rebuild that line, give Levis the best protection possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they definitely need a tackle, and I think if they really believe in Will Levis, that's what they're going to do. Because again, this draft is really stacked at wide receiver. So if they want one like Adonai Mitchell or Keon Coleman in the second round, there's going to be a lot of good options there. So I don't think you have to rush a selection of a wide receiver, especially if you feel like you have a bigger needed tackle. I think that's a pretty smart pick for
Absolutely.
the team. For the Atlanta Falcons, so in this scenario, I'm going to imagine they have just traded for Justin Fields. They have their quarterback. Um, so I think that's going to leave them looking at Rome Odunze because Drake London has been good, but not really special. He hasn't been like a legit wide receiver one. Granted, he hasn't had great quarterback play, so he's never had the chance to prove himself. But if I'm the Falcons and I'm like, what's our identity going to be this year? It's going to be being absolutely stacked at every position on offense. Bijan Robinson at running back, Kyle Pitts at tight end, Drake London plus another first round pick at wide receiver, a good offensive line. And their defense is pretty okay too. So I feel like if you're the Falcons and you want a chance to be a real good team this year, you got to go get another wide receiver to put across from Drake London, and that's going to be Rome Odunze.
Yeah. All right. So at pick number 9, the Bears are have their second pick in the first round. I think, going Caleb Williams one, first overall, and looking at, some of those other needs that the team needs to kind of get, locked down. I think they're going to build around Caleb Williams in free agency. They already have some really good receivers. Offensive line is decent. I think they're going to start to look to the defensive side of the ball. And I think that they're going to be taking probably one of the better cornerbacks, if not the best, in the draft. And that in no means is my bias in there, being a Hawkeyes fan myself. But I think they're going to be picking Cooper DeJean at pick number 9. Coop is a good pick. Played super well for the Iowa Hawkeyes in regards to their stellar defense, despite their offensive issues. He's a great pickup, and I think he's going to elevate the Bears defense into, creating not only a team offensively with Caleb Williams and what he's able to do on that side of the ball, but also building a defense that can keep the Bears in games and let them run away with games as well. So I think it's a good pick to go with Cooper DeJean at 9.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that'd be a great idea for the Bears to add to their secondary, stud corner like that. Um, for the Jets at number 10, I'm almost certain they're going to go offensive line because, they're rebuilding for another year with Aaron Rodgers. They have Garrett Williams at wide receiver. Their defense is fantastic. Their offensive line is really the main problem they have. The question then
Yeah.
becomes, which offensive lineman are they going to pick? I think they need tackle pretty badly. PFF has Talais Fuaga as the number 2 offensive tackle in the draft class, but I think most draft experts consensus agree it's Alamuia Fashanu. So for the Jets to protect
Yep.
Aaron Rodgers and hopefully keep him in the game a lot longer this year than he was last year, I'm going to go with Alamuia Fashanu.
So I think at pick number 11, what we really see here is a Vikings team that is in rebuild. They're starting to break things down. They're starting to uh, build off of, whoever they're going to be bringing in this draft. And I think their number one, guy that they're going to be looking at when it comes to bringing in someone to base your franchise around, I think they're going to go quarterback here. And with quarterback being, a big part of this league, especially in the NFL, nailing the quarterback. I think the top prospects, of course, to look at are JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Penix Jr. I think those are your top three. And I think out of these three guys, I think that the Vikings are gonna go with Bo Nix out of Oregon. They're going to skip past JJ McCarthy being a little bit higher in the rankings, and I think they're gonna give Bo Nix a shot at being their quarterback one for the future. What he was able to do at Oregon this year, I know it didn't end stellarly. They didn't end in a championship like Michigan did, but what he was able to do on the field was really stellar. And there's a lot of good tape on Bo Nix, and for especially the Vikings who really need to kind of think about, okay, what's our future, not only in our division with three kind of heavyweight guys who have already kind of completed this rebuild process or in the later stages of it. How do we keep up with them? And I think by drafting a quarterback here, they can potentially roll the dice and getting a top guy they can build in the next.
Yeah, I think the Vikings are probably also going to go quarterback at that spot, but I think they're probably going to take Michael Penix Jr. In my opinion, I know PFF had him as the lowest of the 3 guys available that we were talking about, but I think Michael Penix Jr. is clearly the number 4 best quarterback in this draft. I think he has the best deep ball of any quarterback in this draft. He has a great command of the game. Obviously, he kind of choked under pressure during the big championship game, and that was rough to see for him. But if you look at his whole body of work and not just that one game, I think he was very impressive throughout his entire year, this past year. And combined with his deep ball accuracy, I think he's a very attractive prospect at quarterback. So for that reason, I think he'll be the Broncos pick here at number 12 because I think they definitely need a quarterback to restock the shelves after they trade or cut Russell Wilson after this offseason.
Absolutely. And, that being the case, I think the Raiders are also going to be going quarterback here. Just like we saw 1, 2, 3 in regards to, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and um, Jaden Daniels. I think we're going to see Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and JJ McCarthy go 11, 12, 13. Obviously, the order could be a little bit different, but I think the Raiders are going to be picking their next guy as well. Jimmy Garoppolo is not him, and Aiden O'Connell and that they have are just not their hope. So I think picking a young guy here, especially a guy who won the college championship game, it's not a bad pick to roll your dice on.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. The Raiders know they need a quarterback, and there's no better time to get one than in the first round. I don't think JJ McCarthy's going to make it to the second round. I don't think he'll at least make it to the Raiders pick in the second round. So if they want one of those top six quarterbacks that are up there, I think they're going to have to use their first round pick to get one. Maybe you'll see like trade back by the Raiders to like the 20-ish range and then take JJ McCarthy there, see if they can pick up some
Yeah,
extra draft capital. But if JJ McCarthy's still on the board, I don't know if he makes it past the Saints because I feel like they also really need a quarterback in the worst way. So
exactly.
um, with all the round one worthy quarterbacks taken off the board, I think, they have a pretty big need at offensive line. They have a pretty big need at defensive tackle and edge rusher. Byron Murphy is amazing. Uh, he definitely deserves to be in consideration for a top 10 pick. But I think the Saints are going to go offensive line here and take Talais Fuaga because if you can't protect the quarterback, then there's no point in drafting one or finding a good one. So I think, just building towards that future of a good offensive line, the Saints will go with Talais Fuaga.
Yeah. I think that, with Fuaga being picked off the board, I think the Colts are going to be going with Byron Murphy
Yeah.
here at 15.
There's just no way I feel like he drops farther than that. He is such a stud.
Yeah.
Um, oh man. For the Seahawks at this pick, this is tough because they need interior offensive linemen, and that's something that there's just not really an abundance of right now. They also need
Yeah.
edge rushers, and there hasn't been any edge rushers taken yet. We still have Jared Verse on the board. We still have Chop Robinson. We still have Latu Latu. I
Hmm.
think for the Seahawks, I'm going to go with Latu Latu. I feel like he's probably going to go inside the top 20, despite where PFF had. Well, I guess they have him as a top 20 prospect. Um, I just think he is going to be the first edge off the board because his edge rushing ability is off the charts. I know he has the injury history and I know his run defense ability isn't the best, but if you're looking for a guy who can change the game like a Micah Parsons type, Latu Latu is definitely the guy in this draft class with the best chance of being a really impactful edge rusher. So I think Seattle is going to go with Latu Latu here.
Yeah, I think with the Jaguars pick, they obviously have some concerns, especially at guard and center. And I think they're going to focus on offensive line here at 17. And I think out of what's on the board, I think they're actually going to go with center Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. So I think they're going to take him at 17.
Yeah, I love Jackson Powers Johnson. If he wasn't a center, if he played any other position, I think he'd be a top five pick. He's just
Yeah.
absolutely dominant at the position. He's been killing it at pretty much everything he's done in the offseason, the Senior Bowl and all that sort of stuff. So he is a player that is going to be like the next Jason Kelsey, in my opinion. He's the next
Yeah.
great center to enter the league. I would really hope he falls to the Cowboys pick, but I honestly don't think he'll make it that far. That would be a home run pick by whatever team ends up picking him.
Yeah.
Uh, for the Bengals, ooh, this is tough because they have a really good, like, well put together squad right now. I feel like but they're desperately trying to protect Joe Burrow. Feels like he's always under pressure. Maybe that was a little better this year, although he did get hurt and, was out for a while. So I feel like another investment in the offensive line certainly is not something to, eliminate from the picture here for the Bengals. So I'm going to go with J.C. Latham out of Alabama, who I feel like is the best remaining tackle on the board here. I think they'll shore up that offensive line and help keep Joe Burrow standing.
Yeah. Now this is an interesting pick for the Rams, because they do have some holes in terms of players that, uh, they want to fill. Um, I feel like here, I feel like the Rams are also probably going to go offensive line. Matt Stafford hasn't necessarily, um, really just, you know, he's not aged out yet, and he certainly has the capabilities to go another year. And I think protecting him is probably going to be a concern for the Rams at pick number 19. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up picking the next kind of top rated tackle at Amarius Mims out of Georgia. I think he could absolutely go to the Rams to help kind of shore up that protection, give him time in the pocket to throw to Nakua, Cup, whether it's pass defense or pass rush defense, or even blocking for the run with Kyrie Williams. That's a good setup for that team.
Yeah, Marius Mims. I love Marius Mims. If he makes it to 24, he'd be the guy I want the Cowboys to pick. He's a little raw, but he has all the physical tools to be not just the best tackle in this draft class, but the best tackle in the league. So I would love to see him come to Dallas, but that's a great pick by the Rams there. Um, Nate Wiggins is still on the board, the number 9 ranked player on PFF's board, and ranked pretty highly, I think, with most draft experts. And the Steelers, taking a guy like that and pairing him with Joey Porter Jr., I feel like gives the Steelers one of the best like cornerback duos in the league, and it will be there for a long time because they're both very young. So pair that with like Minka Fitzpatrick at safety. No good quarterbacks left on the board. I think the best move for the Steelers here would be to take Nate Wiggins.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that'd be a good pick. Um, I think for the Dolphins with offensive line and tight end being kind of the two needs for this roster. Um, you know, they're still Fatanu out of Washington, who's a tackle that's on the board that they could pick up. But I'm actually going to go with tight end here for the Dolphins, and I think they're going to pick up J. Travion Sanders out of Texas. And so I think they're going to pick him since tight end ever since Mike Gesicki left has been a big kind of issue for them. I feel like taking a hopeful replacement for him was something that they could add to all the other offensive firepower that they have. Just giving not only just Tua another target, but if let's say Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are covered and maybe Achan didn't get the screen right, that tight end could not only just block for you in terms of providing that, extra blocking power for that screen. But tight ends sometimes can get lost in the shuffle. And can you imagine trying to cover not only Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, but now you have to also worry about a tight end that's floating around. I think Sanders could be a big part of their offensive successes where they fell short last season.
Yeah, I fully agree. I feel like Jatavian Sanders would be a first round lock in any draft where Brock Bowers didn't exist. He is a
Yeah.
really special player, and he would be a first round pick, I think, most years. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was a first round pick this year. Like you said, the Dolphins really haven't had a threat at that position, since Mike Gesicki left for New England. Pairing a guy like that, like you said, with Waddle and Hill and Devon Achane and, Raheem Morris, that would be an insane offense. Just make them even better. That's a great pick for the Dolphins. The Eagles, their secondary was really what let them down as they started on that losing streak that ended up giving the Cowboys the NFC East. Um, Darius Slay was really bad. James Bradbury was very bad. But the Eagles said they're going to stay committed to James Bradbury. So I think they still
Yeah.
have one corner spot to replace with Darius Slay. Um, if they also have a slot corner that they aren't really so sure about. So that being said, I think they're going to draft a secondary player here. Quinyon Mitchell has an extraordinarily high ceiling. I think he might be the highest ceiling player in the entire secondary for this draft class. But I think Terrion Arnold is more ready to play right now. I think he also has an incredibly high ceiling, not quite as high as Quinyon Mitchell. So I think the Eagles will do the safe thing here and take Terry Arnold because they know this is going to be a guy that's going to come in and make a difference for them on day one.
No, that absolutely makes sense. So for pick number three with the Houston Texans, there's been some circulation that, Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be their pick. As he's a top cornerback. I actually think that they're going to go kind of work on their defensive line a little bit, and I think that they're going to be taking Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. I think that's going to be a really great pickup for them, in helping kind of round out that defensive line. And he could benefit a team like the Texans. And I think living up to DeMarco Ryan's standards of a defense that he likes, bolstering the depth along this line would be a great pick for them.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great guy to put next to Malik Collins. I think you'll see really good production from Jushan Newton. He's a really exciting player. If He's definitely the number two, three technique in this draft class behind Byron Murphy. Um, that would be a really scary pass rush from the interior for the Texans if they were to pick up Jushan Newton. So that would be a great pick for them. Oh man, this is a tough choice for the Cowboys because I really wanted a good offensive tackle, and the only one left now is Troy Fautanu. If I were the Cowboys in this situation, I think I would probably trade back and target Fautanu, but we are not doing trades. So,
Yeah.
given that, I think what I'm going to do here is take Jared Verse because he is the most well-rounded defensive lineman in this draft class. He's a good pass rusher. He's a good run defender. He's just really good at whatever he does. He's not the best pass rusher and he's not the best run defender, but he's definitely really good at both of those things. Um, I think this would be a really good DeMarcus Lawrence successor right here. DeMarcus Lawrence is just like that, where he's a really good pass rusher. He's a really good run defender. That's exactly what I think you'll get with Jared Verse. DeMarcus Lawrence is in his 30s now. I don't think he has a lot of years left on the team. So, given this specific board, I'm going to go with Jared Verse for the Dallas Cowboys here, which I think it would be a surprise if he makes it all the way to them. So, I would be very happy with that.
I think for the Green Bay Packers at 25, I think they're going to be looking to draft a tackle. And I think Washington's prospect, Troy Fatanu, is going to be that guy for him. The only other speculation that I have for them is potentially taking Jordan Morgan out of Arizona, the tackle out of Arizona. But if Fatanu from Washington is on the board for the Packers, I would say they're going to be taking him.
I absolutely agree. I love Jordan Morgan, but Fontano is just a much better prospect in my opinion. So I would be shocked if he was still there and the Packers passed up on him. For the Buccaneers, that's a really interesting choice because they need a lot of things. Levante David is probably leaving in free agency, so they're going to need a linebacker. They definitely need some help at corner, edge, because they just released what's his name? Was it Shaq? Crud. What was the edge rusher they had in Tampa Bay? They just released him. It was
Yeah, they
Shaq
just released
something.
him.
I don't remember what his last name
Yeah.
is. It's not important. So they could definitely use some edge rusher help. Uh,
Was it Shaq Leonard? Shaq
yeah,
Leonard?
Shaq Leonard, that's it. Um, Dallas Turner is kind of a risk because he has the physical tools to be like the best defensive lineman in this entire draft, but he's kind of unrefined. So it's a little bit of a risk to take a guy like this who doesn't really know what he's doing so much, but's just been coasting by raw talent. But also, obviously, they have a huge upside because he could end up being like an absolutely dominant, like Miles Garrett type player. Um,
Hmm.
so I think the Buccaneers are going to take a little bit of a risk in this situation, and to replace Shaq Leonard, they're going to go select Dallas Turner.
Interesting. Um, I think for the Cardinals here, with offensive linemen and them taking with the offensive linemen off the kind of docket in terms of, other than really Graham Barton from Duke. I think that they're going to, not only did they already take Marvin Harrison Jr. in this draft, so wide receivers should be covered. I think they're going to look toward the defense side of the ball. And out of Quinyon Mitchell and Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think out of the two, in terms of cornerbacks that they would be looking at, in terms of my projection of who they're going to be selecting at 27, I think they're going to go with Kool-Aid McKinstry. And I think, he's ranked a little bit lower, but that was just because he had a stellar number of years at Alabama. And his last year, quarterbacks just didn't target him because he was great at his coverage. And that obviously brought down some of his stats and statistics. And so I think a lot of people are overlooking him when it comes to, where is he in his rankings? But I think he's a dynamic cornerback that is going to aid, the Cardinals, especially not only picking up a great offensive powerhouse weapon in Marvin Harrison Jr. on the offensive side of the ball, but picking up Kool-Aid McKinstry at the same time for the defense. It's kind of a win-win situation for the Cardinals here at 27.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be a great pick for them, bolstering that secondary. Like you said, Kool-Aid McKinstry's a great player. Now for the Buffalo Bills, I feel like they might be parting ways with Stephon Diggs. Even if they don't, he wasn't great towards the end of last season, and they really need to find another legitimate weapon, to put out there with him. So I think I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU, who I think is going to be a first round pick this year. He's tall, he's fast, he's very fast. He's an okay route runner. He's got good hands. I think he might be a steal if he ends up falling this far. I know PFF has Troy Franklin placed above him, and I can understand that to an extent because Franklin's also a very explosive player. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the more complete wide receiver, and I think he's at least as explosive, if not more, than Troy Franklin. So for the Buffalo Bills, I will be selecting Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU.
Solid pick. Solid pick. So for the Lions here at pick 29, I think that their big issue this whole season, really when it came to their success and their disadvantages on the field, um, we talked about this for a long time, but their cornerbacks were not great. They let up a lot of yards to a lot of receivers, and they kept games super close. Some games in which the Lions were able to overcome, and games in which they were not. And it led to, a it was a stellar season for them, I think, overall, and what they were able to accomplish. But of course, that ultimate goal of a Lombardi Trophy was unattainable based on the defense, but especially the cornerback position. And with Quinyon Mitchell still here, I think really the battle is between him and out of Missouri, Ennis Rackstraw Jr. But with Quinyon Mitchell still here at cornerback, at this point in the draft, I think that they're going to be taking him over Rackstraw.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm surprised Quinyon Mitchell actually lasted that long because he is by far the highest ceiling corner in the entire draft.
Yeah.
So great pick for the Lions there if he ends up lasting that long. Uh, for the Ravens, this is tough because what position do you want to address here? I mean, Odell was not great last year. He did not really make much of a difference. The only wide receiver who was like consistently a difference maker for them was Zay Flowers. So I would not be surprised if they went out and got another wide receiver. That being
Yeah.
said, they also don't really have any premier edge rushers, and they're pretty old at the cornerback spot, at least at some of the cornerback spots. So there's really a lot of different ways they could go here. Also, I don't think it would be out of the question for them to draft a tackle, given how loaded this year's tackle class is, and they have some aging players at that position as well. Um, this is a tough choice, but all that being said, I think they're going to go wide receiver. but I do not think it will be Troy Franklin. In my opinion, Troy Franklin is way too high on this list. He should be in the second or the third round. Ladd McConkey out of Georgia is one of my favorite wide receivers in this entire draft class. He can cut and run routes really well. He just creates separation. He's explosive. He's a guy that knows how to get open, and he's a guy that knows how to score. And I definitely think he's going to be a first round pick. I think he'd be a lethal combination with Zay Flowers, and you'd see that Ravens passing offense take a huge jump next year if they added a wide receiver like this opposite Zay Flowers. So for that reason, I think Ladd McConkey out of Georgia will be their draft selection.
So with the San Francisco 49ers, of course, offensive line and cornerback are kind of their main concerns when it comes to this draft. But something that I think, at the onset of the season and as we watched the season, I was a lot higher on their defense, especially, as the season progressed. I thought it was probably one of the best units in the National Football League. And that being the case, it really kind of surprised me how they really fell off in the later half of the season, but specifically in the playoffs. And really giving teams the ability to come back against them, to make games close. And I think to try to kind of balance and add some younger talent on the defensive side of the ball, maybe help plug some of those holes. I think, since Rackstraw is still on the board from Missouri at the cornerback position, I think given the tackles and the offensive linemen that are available right now, especially with Graham Barton from Duke and Tyler Gutton from Oklahoma. You could even throw in Jordan Morgan from Arizona. I think the 49ers are going to look at those guys and be like, you know what? Let's go defense. And so I think the 49ers at pick 31 are going to be taking Rackstraw Jr. out of Missouri.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Pair him with Javarius Ward. That'll be a killer duo for a long time.
Absolutely.
I don't think Rackstraw is going to make it this far. I think PFF's board had him too low, but that would be a home
Yeah.
run pick for the Niners if he lasts that long.
Yeah.
Now for the Kansas City Chiefs, uh, it is time for them to get another wide receiver. I don't think
Yep.
who is on the board matters at this point for them. I think they're going to go wide receiver. The question is which wide receiver, because I already told you I'm not very high on Troy Franklin. I don't think he would be the pick here, given this board. The next wide receiver that I'm actually really high on is probably Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. He's super
Mm.
fast, very explosive, deep play threat. I would be surprised to see him go where PFF has him going, all the way at the bottom of the second, beginning of a third.
Yeah.
So I will be going with Devontae Walker to pair with Rashee Rice for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Interesting pick. Solid pick, I think. Um, yeah. So there you have it, folks. That is our first round. Mock draft, our first one ever on the Redzone Rodeo. Uh, we're going to be bringing you another one next week of potential scenarios and whatnot. But in regards to kind of as we're looking at the playing field right now, these are kind of what we're feeling. Uh, these teams are going to be selecting. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with any of our picks or you disagree, and let us know who else you would pick for certain spots. We're all open to discussion based on football, especially in regards to the drafts. We love it. So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah. Is there
Which
anything else you wanted to add, including the draft here?
uh which pick do you think will be the first one that's wrong here?
New York Giants taking Brock Bowers,
Who do you think they'll pick instead? Joe Alt.
Joe Alt. Yeah, I think those two are going to be swapped. Yep.
I bet you would be pretty happy with that,
I would be pretty happy with Brock Bowers coming to Tennessee. But
huh?
I think the Giants will go tackle, just to protect. Daniel Jones, so he's not running for his life again. I just don't know how, with Evan Neal being a liability, I just don't know if another season is going to fix him. And I think the Giants organization knows that.
Yeah.
So that being the case, I think, you mentioned, taking the best talent off the board. Joe Alt is clearly that when it comes to tackle. So I think the Giants, I think that in my thinking, I think the quarterbacks could absolutely go that way. One, two, three. I mean, you could even argue like Drake May goes over Jaden Daniels, and you switch those around. But I think for this, I think Giants take Joe Alt and Titans take Brock Bowers. How about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I could certainly see that happening. It's just as likely, I think, as what we have here. I wouldn't be surprised either way. Um, I think one spot where we might have been wrong, and this was my pick, was Jaden Daniels to the Commanders.
Hmm.
I know it's picking up steam, him being the number two overall quarterback in this draft class as opposed to Drake May. But I still think the overall consensus is that Drake May is the number two guy. So if I had to pick a spot that we were wrong at, it would probably be this one. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I wouldn't be surprised either way, Drake May or Jaden Daniels at number two overall.
Yeah. And I think the same could be said about our picks 11, 12, and 13 with uh
Yeah.
Nix, Penix, and McCarthy. I think that, the three of those teams, I think, I don't doubt that they're going to be picking quarterbacks. It's just the order that those might go in.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that with you,
Yeah,
Carson.
that was
Um,
good. That was good.
that was very good. It's always exciting to look at all these new players coming out and see how they could fit with a bunch of teams. See how the league will be
Absolutely.
shaped by this draft. There's a lot of exciting players in this year's draft class. So
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's going to be super cool. It's always my favorite time of the year. Younger players coming into the league, not only for your own personal favorite team, but how they affect, the trajectory of some of these franchises. Even this past year, we were able to see how rookies like CJ Stroud was able to light up the league, or even Rashid Rice was able to pick up steam later in the half of the season with the Chiefs, and how he was able to be a big playmaker for them throughout the playoffs. Um, you know, it's players like that, if they weren't in the league, where would we be type thing. So it's always great to see kind of this new talent coming in, and seeing if, they end up shaping teams for the worse or for the better. That's
yeah,
obviously, we'll wait to see how that all transitions and turns out.
one of the most exciting times in football, in my opinion.
Yeah. And now not only do we get a couple this kind of waiting, but we get spring football back in a new form
Yeah,
that is going to take over. I'm calling it now. It's going to take over the world. This is going to be here to stay. Spring League here to stay. I
that's
love the
right.
USFL. I love the XFL minus a couple rules in the game. But other than that, that is coming together and they're building a league. And, I've heard some people like kind of talk to me about how it's like a minor league, as some would say, that hockey and baseball has. Um, and I would agree in some sorts, but it's really uh, just a great league to show off talent that can absolutely eventually one day help shape the NFL, as we've talked about with many players, even on the Dallas Cowboys. So, um,
Two consecutive All Pro selections out of spring football leagues for the Dallas Cowboys. So
yeah, and that's lit up the NFL, and that's just in one team. Now, imagine if some of these other teams start, not only just, I'm sure they pay attention, but really dig in and be like, you know what, we need that guy on our roster. I think he'd be a great addition, and seeing how that all fits in. But
yeah,
anyways, I think that is going to be a wrap for this episode. We covered a lot. Thank you all for sticking with us and enjoying along the way. Certainly covered a lot, from wide receiver rooms in the UFL for each team to first ever Redzone Rodeo mock draft. So a lot of fun and a lot of great stuff awaits us for next week. So just want to thank you all for tuning in, and listening and hanging out with us. And of course, if you haven't already and you want to keep following us and get notified whenever we are launching a new episode and whenever we put out new clips, please definitely like and subscribe and turn that notification bell on, because we'd love to have you with us on our journey. And if there's any football news, we're going to be covering it because we love it. Um, So with that, is there anything else, Rob, that we forgot, or anything else you want to add before we sign off for the evening?
Just that, I know that these videos are not perfect, but they're a lot of fun to make, and I hope they're a lot of fun to watch. And I'm really glad everyone who's watching right now is watching. It means the world to both me and Carson. So just thank you. Thank you for watching our videos and, taking this journey with us, like Carson said. And yeah, see y'all next week.
Awesome, guys. Alrighty. Well, you have a great work week, and we'll catch you guys next time, okay? See ya. Signing off.